Frank Sinatra is standing under a single spotlight in the private showroom of the Flamingo Hotel. 300 people are watching, but only one man matters. He's sitting at the center table, Vincent Carbone, a man whose name is never printed in newspapers but whose reach extends into every casino vault on the Strip. Frank is singing. His voice is smooth. The room is swaying, and then it happens. One word. One wrong word. Frank catches himself mid-syllable. He covers it with a smile, a slight improvisation that most audiences would never notice. But this isn't most audiences. The music keeps playing. The crowd keeps smiling. But at table 1, Vincent Carbone sets down his glass. He doesn't blink. He doesn't move. He just raises one finger. And the entire room goes cold. What happens in the next 60 seconds will determine whether Frank Sinatra walks out of this casino as a legend or as a cautionary tale whispered in back rooms for the next 50 years. To understand why one wrong lyric nearly ended Frank Sinatra's career, you have to understand Las Vegas in 1960. This wasn't the corporate playground it would become. This was a city built on sand and secrets. The shows were distractions, while fortunes changed hands in rooms without windows. And the men who really ran the Strip didn't care about music. They cared about control. Frank had arrived in Vegas as a comeback kid. His career had nearly died in the early 50s. Then came From Here to Eternity, the Oscar, Capitol Records. By 1960, Frank wasn't just a singer, he was an institution. But institutions in Las Vegas operated by permission. The Rat Pack owned the stage, they owned the crowds, but they didn't own the buildings they performed in. Those belonged to men like Vincent Carbone. Carbone had risen through the Chicago outfit before settling in Nevada. He wasn't flashy, he wore gray suits. He spoke quietly, and when he made a request, people treated it like a commandment. In February 1960, Carbone was hosting a private event at the Flamingo. The guest list included union bosses, politicians, businessmen whose businesses couldn't survive sunlight. And Carbone wanted Frank Sinatra to perform. Not the Sands, the Flamingo, Carbone's territory. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. Frank's manager tried to decline. The response came back through channels. Mr. Carbone doesn't understand the word no. So Frank went, because even the chairman of the board understood that some chairs had higher backs than his. Frank arrived at the Flamingo at 9 p.m., 3 hours before showtime. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, the collar open just enough to suggest he didn't care about formality. But his jaw was tight. His eyes were scanning every corner of the room. His pianist, Bill Miller, had come with him. Bill had been with Frank for years. He knew when to talk and when to stay silent. Tonight was a silent night. Small room, Frank said, looking at the private showroom. Intimate. Exclusive, Bill corrected. Different thing. Frank lit a cigarette. Same thing when you're the one on display. He walked the stage, checked the microphone, tested the acoustics. Every detail mattered, because Frank understood something most performers didn't. Perfection wasn't about talent. Perfection was about preparation meeting pressure. At 10:30 p.m., Vincent Carbone arrived. He didn't make an entrance. He simply appeared, materializing at the center table as if he'd always been there. 2 men flanked him, but they stayed back, shadows with shoulders. Carbone was in his late 50s. His hair was silver, combed back with precision. His face was unremarkable, except for the eyes. They were the color of old coins, and they never seemed to blink. He looked at the stage. He looked at the microphone. He looked at Frank. Then he nodded once, a greeting that was also an instruction. Begin. Frank's regular crew wasn't there. The band was Carbone's people. The sound engineer was Carbone's guy. Even the bartenders moved with a certain military precision that suggested they answered to someone other than hotel management. Frank was a guest in someone else's house, and the house always wins. The first hour went smoothly. Frank opened with his standard Vegas set, upbeat numbers to warm the crowd. Stories between songs, self-deprecating jokes that made the powerful men in the room feel like they were sharing drinks with an old friend. The crowd was responsive. Laughter in the right places. Applause that felt genuine. Even Carbone's stone face cracked, something resembling a smile during a particularly well-timed punchline. Frank began to relax. Maybe this was just another gig. Maybe the rumors about Carbone were exaggerated. Maybe the pressure he'd felt walking in was just old paranoia from the hungry years. Then came the request. A waiter approached the stage during a musical break. He handed Frank a folded napkin. Frank opened it. Written in neat block letters, the song, "You Know Which One." Frank looked at Carbone. The casino boss raised his glass slightly. A toast, a command. Frank knew the song. Everyone in that room knew the song. It was the one Carbone's late wife had loved, the one that had played at their wedding 30 years earlier. The one Carbone requested at every private event, a ritual of remembrance that had become sacred. The problem was simple. Frank had never rehearsed it with this band. He'd assumed it wouldn't be requested. He'd been wrong. Frank leaned over to the bandleader. "You know it?" "We can follow you." Following isn't the same as knowing. "It's what we've got, Mr. Sinatra." Frank straightened his jacket. He looked at the room, 300 faces waiting, and one pair of coin-colored eyes that never blinked. He nodded to the band. They began. The melody was slow, romantic, the kind of song that made you remember someone you'd lost. Frank's voice wrapped around the lyrics like smoke around a flame. The room went still. Women touched their pearls, men looked at their drinks, even the waiters stopped moving. Frank was halfway through the second verse when it happened. One word, one syllable. His memory slipped, and he sang a word that didn't belong. It was small, a different preposition, a reshuffled phrase. Most audiences would have heard beauty. This audience heard a mistake. Frank caught himself instantly. He improvised. He bent the melody slightly, turned the error into a stylistic choice. His face never changed. His voice never wavered. But at table 1, Vincent Carbone set down his glass. He raised one finger, and the band stopped playing. The silence was absolute. 300 people frozen in place, the clink of ice cubes, the distant hum of the casino floor beyond the doors, and Frank Sinatra standing alone on a stage with a dead microphone. Carbone didn't stand. He didn't need to. His voice carried through the room like a cold wind through an open door. That wasn't the song. Frank didn't move. It was close. Close, Carbone repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. My wife loved that song. Every word, every note. She knew it by heart, and you just changed it. I improvised. It's what performers do. Performers. Carbone said the word like it was an insult. You're not performing tonight, Mr. Sinatra. You're honoring a memory, my memory, and you just stepped on it. We said body it wasn't memory. The men at Carbone's sides shifted, not reaching for anything, just shifting. The room felt smaller. Frank could feel the sweat building under his collar. He could feel every eye on him. He could feel the calculation happening in Carbone's mind. How do you punish a man too famous to disappear? But Frank Sinatra didn't beg. He'd been broke. He'd been humiliated. He'd crawled through years of rejection. He knew what fear tasted like, and he knew that showing it was worse than anything it could protect you from. He stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage. Mr. Carbone, Frank said, his voice quiet but steady. I made a mistake. One word in 100, and I'm sorry. Not because you're sitting there with your finger in the air. Not because your boys are measuring me for a hole in the desert. I'm sorry because your wife loved that song, and she deserved to hear it right. The room held its breath. I don't know your band, Frank continued. I didn't rehearse with them. I walked in here cold because that's what you asked for, and I gave you everything I had. If that's not enough, then we've got a problem. But the problem isn't respect. The problem is you invited a singer who doesn't rehearse songs for dead wives with strangers. Someone at a back table dropped a fork. The sound was like a gunshot. Carbone stared at Frank. His face was unreadable. The silence stretched into 10 seconds. 20. Then Vincent Carbone did something no one expected. He laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was dry, quiet, and brief, but it was a laugh. "You've got nerve, Sinatra. I'll give you that. I've got the voice too, if you let me finish." Carbone picked up his glass. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Frank. "Start over, from the beginning, and this time, don't improvise." Frank nodded. "I'll need your band to actually follow me this time. Think they can manage that?" Carbone glanced at the band leader. The man nodded so fast his bow tie shook. Frank stepped back to the microphone. He closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, there was no fear. There was only the song. He sang it perfectly. Every word, every note, the way it was written, the way Carbone's wife had loved it. When the last note faded, Carbone raised his glass, not to Frank, to something unseen, to someone gone. And then he applauded, slowly, deliberately. The room followed. Frank Sinatra had made a mistake, and then he'd made a choice. He chose to stand instead of crawl. He chose honesty over apology. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. After the show, Frank was escorted to Carbone's private table. They shared a drink. Carbone didn't apologize for stopping the music. Frank didn't apologize for the mistake. "Most singers would have begged," Carbone said. "I'm not most singers." "No, you're not." Carbone pulled out a photograph. A woman in a white dress, smiling at the camera. "She would have liked you," Carbone said. "She liked men who didn't bow." They finished their drinks in silence. When Frank stood to leave, Carbone stopped him. "Sinatra, next time I ask for a song, rehearse it. Next time you ask for a song, give me a band that can keep up, indecrossed." Carbone smiled. It was the only genuine smile Frank saw that night. The story spread through Vegas within days. Some said Frank had thrown the microphone at Carbone. Others said Carbone had pulled a gun. The truth was simpler. Two men had tested each other, and both had walked away with respect. Frank never performed at the Flamingo again. He didn't need to. The message had been sent. Sinatra could be summoned, but he couldn't be owned. In the years that followed, whenever anyone asked Frank about that night, he would shrug. "I sang a song wrong. Then I sang it right. That's the job." But those who were there knew better. They'd seen a moment when a single mistake could have ended everything, and a single choice had saved it. There's a lesson in what happened that night in the Flamingo. It's not about perfection. Frank Sinatra made a mistake, a real one, a public one, in front of the worst possible audience. The lesson is about what comes after. Most people, when they stumble, immediately start apologizing. They shrink. They explain. They make themselves smaller, hoping that smallness will protect them from consequences. Frank did the opposite. He acknowledged the mistake and then refused to be diminished by it. He didn't grovel. He didn't make excuses. He simply stood there, looked power in the face, and said, "I'm human. I made an error, but I'm still me." That takes a different kind of courage than never making mistakes. That's the courage to be imperfect in a world that punishes imperfection. Vincent Carbone could have destroyed Frank that night. He had the power. He had the motive. But he didn't. Because even men who traffic in fear understand that there's something valuable in someone who won't be broken by it. Today, most of us will never face a casino boss in a smoke-filled room. We won't have armed men shifting in the shadows while we try to remember lyrics. But we all have our own small stages, our own impossible audiences, our own moments when we sing the wrong word and watch the room go cold. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. You will. The question is whether you'll let those mistakes define you, or whether you'll stand up, look the room in the eye, and finish the song. Frank Sinatra chose to finish. That's his legacy, not perfection, persistence. This was the part of Frank Sinatra's story that never made the headlines. No scandal, no romance, just a man, a mistake, and a room full of people waiting to see him fall. He didn't fall. He finished. This was Frank Sinatra, Legacy Confidential. If this story changed how you see the chairman of the board, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear that mistakes don't have to be endings. Subscribe for more untold stories from the golden age of Las Vegas. And tell us in the comments, what's the hardest room you've ever had to finish a song in? Until next time, keep singing, even when you hit the wrong note.